Okay, we're in Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, and I've got a set of notes for you. What I would like to do is cover these verses 8 and 9 tonight. It's going to be a lot of word study, looking at what is said here. And then we just go into the next part in verse 10. Paul begins to thank them for the gift they've given. He's got some great verses on, being taken care of with supplies or without supplies, because he can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. And he kind of just says, thank you for the gift. And then the book is over. So after all these many weeks, we're very near the end. But in chapter 8 and 9, I'll just read verses 8 and 9, chapter 4, verse 8 and 9. Finally, he says, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, in verse 8, again, I'm going to go through several things in verse 8. A key word is the word think. And we're going to talk about that word, because that's a good translation, but you can see we see this word other places in the scriptures. It means to reckon. It comes from where we get our word logic. It means to examine the evidence and you draw your conclusion. And so they're going to not just be, thinking all the positive thoughts. They're going to be sifting through all of the information and logically concluding from what they see this admirable quality, meaning there's things for them to examine and to conclude. It's like saying, do the math. Look at all the good stuff. So we're looking at that word think. The next thing, we've got that list of those virtues that he talks about. But then in verse 9, he's got 4 words: learned, received, heard, or seen in me. Put it into practice. So there's going to be another list of 4 words that he's giving them. He's taught them many ways. He's given them information, and he's using himself as a model because he's following Christ. And there's others in their midst to use as a model. But they're practicing. In that word practice, we're going to find out it's a habitual thing. Put those things into practice. And then I want you to notice the last line in verse 9, and the God of peace will be with you. Very similar to what we saw up in verse 7. After giving a list in verse 8, think, conclude, reason these things, practice the things I showed you, taught you, demonstrated for you, and then when you do those things, the God of peace will be with you. Now, God is the God of peace. He's doing all things. But if you're not going to do these, and these are imperatives, these are commands, if you're not going to do these things, the God of peace is there, but he's not going to be with you in the sense of you're not going to. And listen, it's the same thing we see in let's go back to verse 6. You'll hear the same thing. We talked about this last week. Do not be anxious about anything. So anxious, nothing. Get anxious out of your mind. Replace anxious. It says, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So last week, you've got the ideal of being anxious, A-N-I-X, anxious, or we'll just use the word prayer with thanksgiving. You can be anxious about things and take the burden on yourself, or you can go to God. Remember we talked about, make your request known, supplicate, give him the list. This is what I'm concerned about, and with thanksgiving. And when you do that, what's the result? Well, then it comes up next, present your request to God. And if you can do that, if you stay over here and you're anxious, God is still the God of peace, but you're going to be anxious. You're going to snuff out that experience of the God of peace. But if you come over here with prayer, it says, and this is the word "and" is a big word in the Greek. And when you study, I read the commentators, that word "and" is just in the English like the word "and," but he's connecting these things together. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So it will protect you from being anxious. And if you pray, there'll be this, again, we talked about that transcending all understanding. Is it something that's above and beyond, something better, a souped up, something that beyond human experience? Or is it something that's not even measurable, it's from another dimension? That word transcends gives that impression. It transcends it. You can't even measure, we can't even describe it. But there's going to be a peace from God that's going to come on you that will protect your heart and your mind from all these things. But you're going to have to go to God in prayer and bring these requests to him. And then in verse 8, he says something very similar. Finally, brothers, or as for the rest. And again, we've seen that word finally. If you go back to chapter 3, verse 1. Remember chapter 3, verse 1? He says, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same thing to you again. And some would say it looks like he closes the letter down in chapter 3. Now he's trying to close it down again. But more likely, it's like he's adding to the list. And this is another thing, or as for the rest of what I'm saying. So this, again, is another finally. As for the rest of what I'm saying, brothers, whatever's true, it gives you that list. Think about such things. And then whatever you've seen me do these things. So basically, he's saying in verse 8, think like this. Verse 9, do like this. And then the God of peace will be with you. So in other words, instead of being anxious, you pray, and the peace of God that transcends all understanding will come upon you and will guard you. And then begin to think this way while you're under that protection, and behave this way, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, if you can't pray, if you can't think this way, if you can't exercise the things he's demonstrated, I'll just trust the peace. You don't have the peace of God. You're too anxious. You've got your own thoughts. You've got your own agenda, and you're definitely not doing what God's called you to, or Paul's demonstrated, and you're not going to have that. And that's the way it is written. Now, with some of the things, there's some of the notes you see at the top of the page. What Paul begins here in verse 8, the finally, brothers, this is clearly Christian, but it is also definitely very Hellenistic. And when I say Hellenistic, I'm meaning Greek. Again, this has nothing to do with hell. It has everything to do with Helen. Helen, the Greek princess or queen. Hellenistic, that means the Greek culture. And the philosophers of that time encouraged their followers, this very thing, to turn their minds away from the difficulties and turn them to the pleasures or virtuous thoughts. The Epicureans taught people to turn one's thoughts from the painful to the pleasure. And it was simply, these are your painful thoughts, block those out and think pleasurable things. Or the Stoics were not so much on pleasure. The Epicureans were more on pleasure and the delightful things of life. The Stoics, and two guys, Cicero and Seneca, taught others to replace the painful thoughts with contemplation of virtue. So instead of the pain, you think about virtuous things. You see the two different areas and these guys pop up in the scriptures every once in a while. As far as either one was just all about pleasure, one was all about discipline and virtue. So one was seeking pleasure, one was blocking out pain with virtuous thoughts. In fact, Cicero's list of virtues matches Paul's in the list that says, Cicero writes, all that is lovely, honorable, of good report. Those are some things that Cicero writes down when he makes the same list. So, the point there being, the Philippians, who were in Macedonia, they were very familiar with Hellenistic culture because it was their culture. They were familiar with these philosophers. They were familiar with these lists. They were a style of being Hellenistic. There's nothing like this in Paul's writings where he's got a list just like this. So it would appear that he's taking something that people were familiar with and bringing it over and Christianizing it. But there's more here than just rehashing of the Greek virtues. Because it also is mixed kind of with some Jewish wisdom, because there's some things from the writings of the Jews. These things are repeated. The character traits that are mentioned here. A good example. Go to James, and this is interesting because we've said go to James chapter 3. I'll just shoot this at you very quickly, just so you can see this, and we'll get started on basically a word study. James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. You can see this list being mixed with Jewish wisdom. And we would say James was very Jewish. He stayed in Jerusalem, oversaw the Jerusalem church, never really gave up the Jewish culture, the Jewish practice, but he became Christian. But yet, just like Jesus was Jewish, but he was very familiar with Greek and the Hellenistic culture, referred to at different times. James, because Rome was there, the Hellenistic culture had been there for generations, James was familiar with Hellenistic culture also. But what you see James doing is also having some of this Hellenistic ideas, combining them with the Jewish wisdom writings. And I'll just read this very quickly. It's the closest thing we've got in Scripture to what Paul's doing right here. chapter 3 of James, verse 13. I'm going to read 13 through 18. James writes, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil." Sounds like Galatians chapter 5. "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Again, that sounds like the works of the flesh from Galatians 5. "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all," now here begins his list, "the wisdom that comes from heaven." Again, notice wisdom. Paul's talking about thoughts or thinking. Again, it's in your intellect, in your mind. Wisdom is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial, sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Now notice again how he wraps it up. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. It's just interesting that his list ends with mentioning and talking about peace, just like Paul's list is going to end up talking about the God of peace will be with you. So in other words, it seems like these virtues, these thinking these ways or considering life this way is going to lead to peace, which in James then ties into then a harvest of right. You're going to be able to produce a harvest of righteousness in your life. And this is important because this is talking about life now. And Paul has already talked about, going back to Philippians, talking about our citizenship is in heaven. We have to have our mind set on heavenly things. But now he comes back and tells the people to look at life and consider, to look for these things. The words again in the NIV are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. Then think. And I want to go to, on the notes, to page 2, and right there, right before Philippians 4:9 begins, the word there is the word think. And I want to look at that right away because this kind of, it gives insight on what Paul is saying. Again, you keep thinking. But when it says think about such things or think about these things, it can come across as if it's some kind of mental mind control. We're going to, not recognize the evil or the bad. We're going to just talk about the good things. Don't say negative things, say positive. And there's a place for that, and that might be exactly what he's saying. But the word think right here, and I don't want to be critical, I'm not a Bible translator, but a couple of the commentators did mention this. The word think is maybe a weak grasping of that. Well, here it is. Look at it right here. The second bullet point on page 2 at the top, it says think about it. It's in parentheses. There's your word, logesithei. This means reckon, count, charge with, reason, decide, conclude, think, or suppose. So things like conclude, reason. It's where we get our word. It's coming. You can see the word in there. Logic is coming from there. It's like it says Abraham considered when he was given a promise of God. He considered his body that was old. He considered that and considered the promise of God and kind of did the math. Okay, I'm old. How am I going to have a child? My wife is barren. But God made a promise. So I've got to do the math. I've got the truth right here, but I've got a higher truth right here that's given me a promise. So Abraham considered it and considered, okay, I guess this is what's going to take place. Or God was able to considered Abraham, God was able to raise Isaac from the dead when he was offering the sacrifice. He considered, he didn't just, fill his mind up with, I'm just going to be positive. He looked at it, he concluded, he reasoned, logical concession here. And this is what Paul is telling. Think about such things. In other words, when you do your math, when you do the logic, when you make conclusions, conclude about such things. You're looking at your life. Remember, I wrote the word life here, right? Life right now. You're already looking at heaven. You already have your citizenship in heaven. But now, back to where you are at. You've got all these things going on in the world. Before you make your final decision, or before you come up with how you view the world, consider these things and bring these things into consideration. So you may have all this negative over here, but you do have the promises of God. You do have these good things. Consider these things when you make your conclusion, when you reason, when you're logical, when you're judging your life, when you're trying to find unity with others. These are the things you should consider. So I'm going to push this past the idea of just think positive. Just have don't think about the negative. Think about the positive. That's good. But I think this is above that. This is more powerful than just, I'm not going to say anything negative. I'm only going to say positive. And there's a place for that. It works very well in the classroom. If you just tell kids positive things, they tend to gravitate towards that kind of. If you're always negative, they kind of emulate what you're talking about. I mean, I feel like I can control a classroom of kids by simply beginning the conversation about how good they are, how productive they've been, and here's all the great things we're going to do. Or I could have come in and says, all the negative, and they'll gravitate to one or the other. That's what we're talking about. See, I mean, there's power in that. I control children that way. But this is something bigger here, I think. Consider or reckon about such things. And so let's go back and look at this list. I've got basically, like I say, a word study, because this verse, and we've got to spend the night on verse 8 and 9 because it's just there's too much in here. And this could get real boring. This could be real mundane. But let's look at each of these words. The first one we've got here is true. And you've got your Greek above there that you can see. You've got, the Greek letters, the Greek transliteration. And the word true, it literally means what can't be hidden. So what true means is consider what can't be hidden. And this is especially in regard to, I can't write everything on the board here, it's take forever. What can't be, and this particularly in regard to what God can see, or what lines up with reality. Not just what is true, but what is really a reflection of reality. And this applies to the concept that what God has created is true. And being the Alpha and the Omega, what God created, what He intended to take place with all the institutions He's come up with. I'm going to take a sideline real quickly here. The foundations. You know that verse? What can the righteous do when the foundations are shaken or destroyed? And the foundations are what God has established, the truth, the fabric of our universe. And the foundations, for example, would be, in our case, some very basic things of humanity. It could include marriage. It could include sexuality. When I talk about sexuality, we're meaning male and female. God made them male and female. He made marriage. He made family. And these things have been under attack for years. But then we go on to, and when I wrote Hope for America's Last Generation, I wish I would have, I've got it listed as one of the institutions God created, is nations. But it never even occurred to me, in 2007 that the concept of nations, and when I'm saying nations, I mean borders, you got to protect yourself, would come under attack. But you should, when it talks about, the Psalms talks about when the foundations are destroyed, where are the righteous going to go? And the foundations are marriage, sexuality, family. And so this is not the first time culture has gone around. Look at the Canaanites. Look at the Israel. Look at that the foundations of the very fabric of the universe that God has established, mankind, we see it happening where mankind just rips those things out, says we're going to create our own reality. We're going to create our own universe. And we're not going to have marriage. We're not going to have boys and girls. We're going to dissolve the family unit. And now, again, depending on your political position, but how are you going to exist without nations, and nations exist without borders? It's like this is an attack on all these institutions and the depravity of man, not just man being individually sinful, but when they group together in their depravity, they begin to destroy the very foundations of what God has created for mankind. And that's amazing. And again, on that list of the 7 institutions that I put in there, Israel is one of them, because God established Israel to bless the nations. They'll be under attack if they aren't already. And the next thing is, God put in the church. All these things are for the benefit of mankind. Marriage was for the well-being of mankind, so they could have families for the well-being of mankind. Nations were formed and governments were established with borders. Each was given their own territory for the well-being of mankind, because that came after the flood and after the Tower of Babel. We got to protect man from his depravity. These things will keep man from destroying us. This nation will rise and fall, but there'll be other nations that will have their own choices without being drugged down by this, like the world flood. Well, then Israel came along so that the promise of God, the revelation, could be given to the nations. And then the church came to bring about the fullness of the message of God. I would assume there's a huge attack, and this is not like, whoa, you think so? A huge attack coming on the church, because it's one of the institutions that God has established. It's the foundations. And the question is, what do the righteous do when those foundations, it's unraveling. The fabric of the universe is unraveling. Now, saying all that, this reality is what God has established. The truth reflects what can't be hidden. And that is what God sees. God can see certain things. Man can try and cover it up and hide it and recreate it, but truth remains. There is still family. There are still sexes of man and woman. There is still marriage. There's still governments. And these things can't be hidden. These things are true. And what it's saying is, when you consider all these things, consider. Not just think about, but consider if it's true. Consider the things that are true, the things that can't be hidden. Man right now in America, they can write their articles and they can pass their politics and they can have their agendas and say, well, it's all changing, and there is no God, it's all evolution, it's all per chance. It's like, right. But you can say that all you want to, but eventually you're going to come face to face with what God sees. You can't hide the truth. The reality is there. So, part of that word truth, right here, I'll read what we've got written down. It literally means what can't be hidden. It means it agrees with the reality and aligns with facts. Now, those facts are not what's in your newspaper or what's coming across on your news feed, but what God has established. It's unconcealed, worthy of credit. It's attested because it has been tested. So this is, again, whatever is true, when you make your decisions, when you're analyzing your life, you take what is true and put that into the formula. Yeah, but the world this, the world's that. Okay, what is true? Remember, this can't be hidden. The news may produce this article here, but it's not going to nullify the fact that that's not true. And this truth is going to overwhelm it. So when it comes down to making a decision, figuring out, doing the math, concluding like Abraham saw the promise, made his calculations. You need to, right here, brothers, whatever is true, think about such things. Again, think about such things. Again, I think it's weak. It doesn't just mean think about the things that are true, but use those in your calculation. When you make, is life worth living? Is something really positive? Sometimes you get just overwhelmed with the world. It's like, well, it's all over. It's all no. What can't be hidden, man's trying to conceal it, but God is not going to let it be hidden. Truth is going to win in the end. Figure that out.
Is meditate a better word? This King James says meditate on this.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I would, I like that.
Is that a better word? Because it goes beyond just thinking at the top of your head.
Yeah, meditate, meaning this is something that you're going to have to practice. Just like when he's going to go down here in verse 9, whatever you've learned, received, heard, or seen in me, put it into practice. That word practice means repeat. Do it over and over. Make this your habit. The thinking would be the same thing. So verse 9 is going to be the doing over and over. Verse 8, the thinking or the meditating, it's not something you're just going to do once. You're just going to say, I'm just going to think positive thoughts. I mean, you can call these positive thoughts, but I like the concept here that these things are, for example, whatever's true. Next one. The word is honorable. Whatever is true. In the NIV, it's noble. In your notes right here, what I've got in your notes, what I got pasted in there is from the English Standard Version. So honorable is the word here. You can see the Greek right there. It means, it can be translated as venerable, grave, serious, dignified. It is used to refer to that which is weighty, deeply respected, because viewed as majestic. Majestic, you think of mountains, something that is larger than life. So whatever is honorable, again, pushing it over here, you got these little trivial problems, little trivial people, little attitudes floating around. But now, whatever is honorable, whatever is serious, whatever is majestic, whatever looms, it's always casting a shadow on your daily life. There's this thing that is bigger than life that's going to, it's on its way. I mean, it could, Jesus Christ is an example. It's like whatever the world is doing down here, little trivial things right here, there's a day coming when Jesus is bringing his kingdom back. This would be something that would be larger than life. It would be something that would be honorable or noble. Think about this reality here, something that is majestic compared to all of the things of life that are trivial, fleeting, passing. The next thing, just. You can see the Greek word, dikia. It comes from the word where we get our word righteous. It's the root word is where we get righteousness, or here translated just. It means just, righteous, impartial is a good word. You see James using this word when he's talking about the things that are a good person is going to be impartial. They're going to judge fairly. And especially in the eyes of God, the things that are, all these things I think are seen from the eyes of God. What is just? The world may be crooked, it may be depraved, it may be twisting the truth, but you realize there is justice. It's just, there's righteousness, and that righteousness again is looming. The word righteous is translated from this word, refer to things or people that conform to God's standard. And so we are to conform to God's standard. That's why we call it righteousness of Christ. We're supposed to live righteous lives. But here he's asking us to think about the things that are conformed to God's standard. We gave you a list of the institutions, but the character traits, the things that, the attitudes, the truths of the Scriptures. These are things that conform. There are things that we should, again, when I say the word think, or the word meditate, reason, conclude. When you do the math, when you figure out the formula, bring this into consideration. The things that are just, the things that are lined up with God's will, that are righteous in His eyes. Next word, pure. The word originally referred to a condition prepared for worship. So when something was pure, it was ready for the worship service. It wasn't going to be worship, but it was ready to be used to worship God. You see the word H-A-G-N-A, when it's transliterated, hagna. And you are familiar with this word possibly from the word holy, and it's coming up there in the notes right there. Hagios right there. Hagios is the word for holy. Sometimes it's translated even saints, the holy ones. But hagios is the Greek word. This is hagna. It's a related word. This one is translated as pure. So just like things are holy, they can worship, they can be part of worship because they're holy, they're not unclean. This is pure. It's got a religious sense about it, or ready to worship God. Things that are pure. The word originally referred to a condition prepared for worship, a related Greek word, hagios. Refers to things that are uncontaminated, undefiled from sin, not spoiled, and not mixed with guilt. And so there are things in the world. Name something, politics. For example, I'm just trying to grab the news. These things are tainted. I mean, not because I'm against them. That's just the world is messing with the truth in the news. The world is messing with politics. These things are tainted. So don't figure these things into your calculations. Figure the things that are pure, the things that are undefiled by these things. Or in politics, what is good about politics? Well, God established government. Okay? So it's not like, well, we should get rid of government. No, government is a good thing. Think about the fact that government is necessary for the well-being of mankind. Yeah, but it's all corrupt. Well, everything's corrupt. I mean, there are corrupt families. There's corrupt fathers. There's corrupt Bible teachers. Sometimes I'm a bad father. Sometimes I'm a bad Bible teacher. But the ideal is these things, government, pastors, fathers, these things are all pure because God is established. Now, just because the government gets corrupted or pastors get corrupted or fathers get corrupted doesn't mean, well, there's no hope. No. Think about the things that are pure on this, from the God side of things, the things that God has established, the things that are undefiled. And so it refers to things that are uncontaminated, undefiled from sin, or not spoiled or mixed with guilt. So think about the pure things. Figure those things in. Lovely. And again, he's talking to some people that are being overrun by the world. They have got conflict within their churches. And it's like, it's easy to say, the world is against us. There's conflict in the church. There's no unity. It's like he's saying, take a step back. Bring those anxious thoughts to God. Pray about them. Make a list. And the peace of God that transcends understanding will guard you. Now you start looking at these things from that guarded position. You're guarded from, we're not talking about being naive. We're saying pull the veil back. Everything's tainted with sin. Pull that veil of sin back and see all these things that are tainted. There's something majestic about it. There's something noble about it. There's something good about it, something pure, that God has established these institutions, and God is still working. Things like, for example, the word truth, things that they can't be hidden from God. Okay, next. After pure, or just and pure, then the word lovely. It's two words. The first word is P-R-O, and the next word comes up is phileo, and it puts those two together. You're going to get pros, phile, and the word pros means extending towards. I'll just say towards. And philo, you can see right there, it's the word for affectionate, caring. It's the Greek word for friendship, like the Greek word for love, for friendship. And so affectionate, caring, I'll just write affectionate, caring. Or again, it's friendship. It's towards affectionate caring, or whatever is lovely. Things that are aiming towards, moving towards being lovely, towards caring, affectionate caring. Again, other translations, options would be things that are pleasing or things that are acceptable. The word refers to something that is worth the effort to have and to embrace. So whatever is lovely here, and that's a good way of saying it, whatever is worth pursuing. Now, there are some things in life that are not worth pursuing. It's like, one, they're passing away, they're tarnished, they're sinful, whatever, they're not worth pursuing. This is something that is towards affectionate caring. It's worth going towards. Whatever is worth going after. Now, we've listed several things that God has established. These are things that are worth going after. For example, family is worth going after. Marriage is worth going after. The government is worth, because God established government. Protecting your nation, nationalism is lovely in this sense. Again, I'm just repeating the same list, but you can have other things you put on there. These are things that are lovely, or they're worth pursuing. There's certain things that people say, well, I'm just going to give up on that, or I'm going to give up on this. That's the negative attitude. You want to make sure you maintain family. You want to make sure you maintain marriage. You want to make sure you maintain government. This is a good reason to get involved in government. Whatever is lovely, whatever is, again, lovely. Don't let the word lovely, it's like, well, that sounds kind of like flowers and you know, little hearts and lovely. Whatever is lovely. It's like, okay, right. What's worth pursuing? What's worth being affectionate about? And the word is actually friendship. What's worth being unified? And again, that can be, the church. It can be Israel. It can be government. It can be schools and institutions. It doesn't have, all these things, everything has been affected by sin. But look at it and say, there's something, reason sin has polluted this is God has created it. Next, commendable. Refers to something that is well reported of, spoken in a kindly spirit. Reputable comes from two combined Greek words, EU, and the word P-H-E-M-E, eupheme, which means, means well done, good, rightly. So basically, we'll just say well done, not your state, but well done, like in good. And pheme means a report, or a saying, or fame, meaning the name spread, and they became famous. Not famous like in People magazine fame, but they've got such a good report. People have heard about it. There's a reputation, a well-done report, or a good fame, a good reputation. Whatever is in that sense right here, translated again, whatever is commendable, pursue these things, or calculate these things, think about these things. The next word is excellent, and Paul writes here, after saying noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy. Again, if anything on this list, if anything is excellent, the word excellent means virtue, a moral excellence, meaning it's wholesome, a perfection, a goodness, a gracious act, uprightness. If anything is of that moral excellence, or the next word is praiseworthy, and the word praiseworthy, the next page, meaning it's approved for praise. And that's where the two words you can see on your Greek notes there, again, are the Greek words. It begins with epi. It's a compound word, epi, which means on or upon or fitting. It can also mean above. It's beyond or above, but here's the word, it's fitting. And anos, which means praise. This is not just something people praise, like some kind of Hollywood awards or something. This is fitting praise. This is something that has praise that is fitting. It's appropriate. Something that is praiseworthy. Not something that is just praised. You see people praising things being promoted that are not praiseworthy. They're wrong. They're sinful. They're destructive. But yet the world wants to praise. Oh, look, that's a great movie. No, it's not. That's a great song. No, it's not. That's what a great person. It's like, no, they're popular. They're not praiseworthy. And so the things that are fitting for praise, again, fitting praise, accurate. See the last bullet point under worthy of praise, fitting praise or accurate acknowledgement or appropriate commendation. There are certain things that are receiving awards that if Jesus Christ were handing out the awards, these people would not be, or these events would not be praiseworthy. You see things all the time that the media is bringing to your attention. Oh, what a great statement! What a great movement! They took a stand for women's rights by causing abortion. It's like, yeah, we're protecting women's rights. We're killing more babies. It's like, okay, that would be, I'm just using this as an example. You may disagree. That's an example of something that's getting praise in the media, but it's not praiseworthy. That would be an error, I would say. Now, the next thing it says right there, think about these things. Or the word think about means to reckon, count, charge with, reason, decide, conclude, think, suppose, bring them into your calculations. And again, the word make we get our word logic from that Greek word. It means to now rationally bring to conclusion. You use those things, bring those things into your calculations. And when the world is going this way, and they're praising things that are unworthy, or they're recognizing things that are destructive, or you see things as destructive, remember, some things are true. They're not hidden. God is going to use governments. He's going to use nations. He's the one, Paul talks about this all the time. Talks about, not all the time, but he mentioned it a couple times, praying for the leaders. It's like, well, that leader's not worthy. Well, okay, God established that position. Your job is to recognize the truth of that position of leadership and pray for it and help it be constructive. They don't have, again, we know that not everybody in the world, in world history, has to be a Christian, a God-fearer, a God worshiper to be used by God. We see many people in the Bible that God uses that never necessarily come to a saving knowledge, but yet they are able to function and God is using them. And God established government, God established leadership. It's not past. So consider your world is basically, it's under God's control. All these things, it's a beautiful world of it. Even though the Garden of Eden is gone, we still have what God produced from the Garden of Eden. Things will produce after their own kind. Seeds are still producing. People are still producing. Animals are still producing. Things are still moving on. You say, well, sin's destroyed everything. Right, that's the obvious truth. But now understand these things. There's the things that are noble, the things that are true, the things that are right, the things that are pure, the things that are lovely, the things that are admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy. And again, there are certain things about marriage in our culture that are not praiseworthy, but marriage itself is praiseworthy. It's the foundation of the family. And family is praiseworthy. Well, families are fun. Right, but family is praiseworthy. These are the things you should logically conclude before you throw in the towel and say, oh, woe is us. Think about or logically conclude, this is my conclusion. There's a lot of things God is doing. Now, from that's what you're supposed to be thinking about. God is active. Verse 9. Then he says, whatever you've learned or received or heard or seen in me. And very quickly, I'm going to try to write those words on the words from the Bible. Think about such things, whatever you've learned. And this is just learned, received, heard, or seen. And these are all ways that Paul has communicated to them I've got them listed at the bottom of page 2. Learn, it refers to learning key facts. So this learn does refer to facts. It does refer to knowledge, information. It's not feelings or emotions or some voice of the Spirit. It refers to facts. Whatever you've learned, key facts, and gaining fact knowledge. It includes learning from experience and learning by reflection, and can mean come to realize. So the facts, or you can reflect and come to the realization. You can realize with the facts, kind of reflecting on historical truths, reflecting on information. There's facts. Now you bring all those together, and you can all of a sudden dawns on you. You realize you have learned. Again, there's more than just, this is like history. That's why there's 1,000 examples. But history, you have to have facts to communicate history. But the point of history is not just to know facts. It's to reflect on those facts and come to realize, oh my gosh, that's the way the world works. You come to some realization. So again, it includes facts, but it includes reflection and realizing some recognition of all these things coming together. That's the word learn. Whatever you've learned. So Paul gave them information, they've reflected, and they've came to some conclusions or some revelation of understanding. Next, receive. This is the word we see in 1 Corinthians 15:1 and 1 Thessalonians 4:1. I won't take time, I don't think. But go back to 1 Corinthians 15, don't turn there. That's when Paul's saying, what I received, I pass on to you. And what he received was the gospel. He talks about what Jesus Christ said, what the disciple says. He received this information. He received it, and he passes it on. And so now they've received this information. Same thing in 1 Thessalonians. It means to take from and receive from. So there's times where Paul received, for example, the information about the Lord's Supper. He says, what I received, I pass on to you. Paul was not there at the Last Supper. Paul did not have some God say, I'm not going to let anybody teach you anything, Paul. You come to heaven and I'll give you a vision of all of history. Someone had to explain to Paul what took place at the Last Supper. He came to understand it, and now he's going to pass that in. He received it, and he's going to pass it on. And some of the things he's received, he's passed on. Now, the word that is right there, para labeta, it comes from the word para, which means from close alongside, and labano, meaning aggressively take. So it means to come alongside of something and aggressively take. So Paul came alongside of them, they came alongside Paul, and they received something. And the receiving is actually, they aggressively took it from Paul. Now again, Paul's willingly giving it to them, but they're receiving something. They come alongside somebody, and they aggressively take something, and that here is information. It's a lifestyle. It's a philosophy. It's a worldview. What they received from Paul, he came alongside, and they were close enough to him where they could take from him the things that he could give them. And that's the word receive. Going after that, together those two words mean, this is the third bullet point under received, together, para lambano means to take or receive by showing strong personal initiative. In other words, the meaning of this word would have to indicate there is some action on the part of the Philippians. Paul's giving it to them, he's trying to explain it, but they're making the initiation of taking it for themselves from them. So they've received it, but they had, in a sense, actually take it. He just said, here's a gift. They had to take it. Next, heard. It basically means hear, listen, comprehend by hearing. It's the word akuo, which means to hear, is where it comes from. This word, akuo, a form of this word, a tense of this word, is used in Romans 10:17, where faith comes from hearing the Word of God. So what they've heard, one of the examples of Scripture is what is heard, this truth will produce faith. So they have heard things. They've learned things from Paul, facts that they reflected on, and came to realize what the meaning of those facts, what it taught them. They received things that Paul gave them. They aggressively took them as their own, if it be a lifestyle, if it be a worldview or philosophy. Here are things that they've heard, and one of the things that hearing this does, it can produce faith. That's just one example. He's taught them these things, and it's produced their faith. And the last thing, or seen, it means to see, look upon, experience, perceive, or discern. This word can be used to say to see with the mind. So to see, this word seen, it can mean they saw Paul live. You know, the what he did, what Paul did, that can be the meaning of seen. They saw what he did. But the ideal here in this flow is not seeing just what he did, but it means to come to see, and, well, right here, I can read it better. This word can be used to say, to see with the mind or to perceive with spiritual perception. So they've learned facts, they've received teaching and information that they've taken, they've heard his words that is producing faith, and now they're perceiving. This might be better instead of seeing. They've now perceived on a spiritual level what all this is meaning. Again, I don't want to discredit the idea of seeing Paul live his life, but they're now at this place. It's not just information and things they've realized. It's like they have this spiritual perception. So all those things together, that's the Greek words. Again, I'm just giving you the meaning of the words. It's like a word study, and you string them together. Then he tells them this. Verse 9, whatever you have learned, received, heard, or seen in me, put it into practice. And there's the word practice. It means you perform it, you accomplish it. This is the active process of performing and accomplishing a deed. In other words, you now have been given these things. Now it's your turn to actively produce in your life what these things are. You do them. You practice them. Again, the active process of performing and accomplishing a deed, it refers to something that is done as a regular practice and becomes a routine or habit. So the emphasis on this is this. Not just do it once, but practice it on a regular basis, in a routine, as a habit. These things that you've learned from Paul, you've received, you've heard him teach, you've seen, you've perceived the meaning of these things. Now put them into your life. Practice them. Make it a ritual. And then, of course, here it is. And then, if you'll do verse 8, all those things, and you'll think about it, and you'll see the world from that position. You'll see all the things tainted by sin, but you'll see the majestic background, the things that can't be concealed, that God is in control of history. Oh, man can mess it up. Nations rise and nations fall. But God is in control of history. And whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, you keep analyzing, figuring out life is coming from that angle. Well, Sarah can't have any children. She's barren. She's old. I'm old. I can't produce a child. But God says, yeah, but I'm going to make a great nation out of you, and you're going to bless all the nations. Well, all right, well, I'll think about this, and I'll focus on the fact that I'll consider my life, that this is not the end of the story here, Sarah. There's something bigger looming over us. You're barren, we have no son, but there's a promise looming over us, something majestic. Let's reckon this into our calculations. You reckon that into your calculations in spite of the fact your wife is barren like Abraham. And then you learn, receive, hear, do these things, and you put them into regular practice. If you can think this way and analyze life from that perspective, if you can put these things into practice in your life, there it is. And the God of peace will be with you. It's like, well, what happens if I can't do this? I'm still anxious. I don't pray. I don't understand God's view on things. I don't have the divine viewpoint on history. I don't understand. I don't learn anything. I just want to feel the presence of God and sing more songs. Well, the God of peace is here, but you're not going to experience unless you're playing the music really loud and singing another song and just block things out. And now you're in some kind of mind control until actually being able to analyze what's happening in life. So it appears, both in verse 7 and in verse 9, that the peace that transcends understanding is connected with your ability to don't be anxious, but to pray with thanksgiving. No, God is able to hear you and respond. And a supernatural type, again, I use the word supernatural. The Bible uses the word transcends all understanding. Peace will come upon you. And then if you can learn how to analyze life and see the lovely, the magnificent, the true things that looming over this earth that is going astray, this culture that is collapsing, but there's something bigger looming here. If you can see that, and then take the things that you know to be true and practice them, the God of peace will be with you in the midst of the turmoil. And that is how Paul is ending, again, this friendly letter. He says it to him. It's not so much that he's chewing them out or warning them or giving this lofty thing, this lofty list that's like, try to climb the highest mountain and do these things. As much as he's saying, if you'll get into this perspective, you can be anxious or you could pray. Go ahead and pray and thank God because He's listening to you. And then understand that all the things that are deteriorating in the earth, there's something bigger looming behind all that. That's God's plan. If you can see that, and then if you can take and do the things that I tried to teach you, and they can become your personal lifestyle, there is going to be a peace that transcends understanding, and the God of peace will be with you. As this culture continues to decline and things continue to spiral out of control, you will have the God of peace with you. So it's almost like saying, here's the secret passage. If you understand what I'm saying here, he's just saying, here's what you should be doing. A good Christian does these things. It's almost like, hey, come here. I'm going to show you the secret passage. It's a passage that takes you to where the peace of God transcends your understanding and where the God of peace will be with you. Come here, I'll show you. You've got to see life from this perspective. It's like, show us that again. I mean, it's more exciting than just, oh, here's the list, put on the refrigerator. I got to think about what's noble. What's noble? Gosh, It's like, no, just, do you know the truth? Then just relax and believe and understand the truth. Something's bigger going on here. And then the God of peace will be with you. I mean, it's almost, when I see it that way, it's almost like laced with grace instead of this legalistic code. I've got to discipline myself and do these things. No. If you'll just understand the Word of God and what's going on, that grace is able to bring your mind into this recognition, and you can logically see it in a bigger way. And all of a sudden, there's God. How did I get here? The God of peace is with you. It's like, what did I do? You just understood the revelation, and you began applying it to your life. There it is. Wow. Okay, chapter 4, verse 10, we begin this next week. You can just see the switch. You can see the switch right here. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. And I'm not saying this because I'm in need. He's talking about right here the gift, financial gift he brought, and I'll just write goods. We can assume they brought him a coat, a change of clothes, whatever make his stay in prison easier, a pan of brownies or something. But it definitely is. He's thanking them, but he's going. I don't want to get too far into this, but he's going to thank them for what they did. But he's going to avoid two things. He's going to avoid one, that he needed it, meaning thank you. That's going to make my life better. But understand, I could get along fine without it. I don't need this because I've learned to be content. And also, that they're not financing his ministry, that they are not, in a sense, his benefactors, that he, in a sense, owes them, or that they bear the burden of taking care of him, or he owes them for supporting his ministry. It's like he is God's servant, and they're supporting God's servant. He doesn't need their help, but I definitely appreciate it. You have given to me. I thank you for it, but you don't own me. I could have got along fine without you, but I'm so glad, because what happened when you start giving here, you're going to receive a reward from God for supporting His work. God is the one who's the benefactor. He's the one who's making this happen. You're just helping God get it done. So you're going to look, if anybody, God is going to give you a reward for supporting Paul, but don't think that he owes you anything, because, and that's kind of where he's going with this. He's thanking them, but being very careful to say, but I'm not like destitute without your help, because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And also, it's God's ministry that's making these things happen. He appreciates your help, and He will reward you. But don't look for me to give you any kind of, kickback or little ministry bonus, or, pray for your sins, or send you some kind of jar of oil to pour on your wounds or something. Anyway, that's where he's going. That's how the book ends. Thank you for being here. I'll pray, and you're free to run away. Father, we do thank you again for this truth. We thank you for the Word of God. We thank you for this opportunity to again analyze the world and know that there's something bigger looming in our lives, that the truth is there, that your institutions have been established, that your plan is being manifested. Even as you prophesied many years ago, it's taking place. We ask that we would indeed embrace these things, see life through that perspective, and be able to take the things we've learned and apply them in our lives. We do look for your peace in our lives. We look for your presence in our life. We do thank you for the grace that is manifested in our lives daily. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for your time.